in Rome, and now we see the real foundations of all European descendant civilizations that were under Rome before the fall, before the split between the Holy Roman Empire and the Byzantine Empire. And it seems like since that point we've had many different civilizations, many different ethnic groups from different places. You see, England, Spain, France, Germany. It's all of these civilizations are descendant from Rome and Greece in some way. They share the philosophers. They respect them. They they learn about all the ancients, even people they disagreed with, because they thought that the ideas were important. There were great thinkers who came before them, and they respected that. They respected tradition. They respected the ancient knowledge and wisdom. And you can see this play out in their architecture, in all of their cultures that grew side by side, distinct. They all had, many, many differences, and you can see them obviously just looking at those cultures, looking at their traditions. But they all had some things in common, being descendant from these mother civilizations, and they still do in many ways today. Now, I'd say that at some point, these civilizations have largely derailed from this, and they've gone in a different direction, which is, obviously, it's a different, yeah, I'd have to say a different direction, and they've turned to liberalism, starting with what, the French Revolution or something, somewhere around there. Now we see in America specifically today these ancient this ancient wisdom is being completely abandoned. We see the cultural, um, I guess, decay from these mother civilizations, that we no longer respect them. We want to tear down all the statues from history of the great leaders all throughout it, in all of Western civilization. I'm not just talking about slave owners, but the founding fathers of America, people who existed even before America. There are people here now who completely disrespect this and reject the entire history of this civilization. Now, when these separate civilizations all created empires and dominated the known world, they had they brought order to a lot of people that didn't have infrastructure and things like that. I think in many ways they made a lot of the colonized countries greater than the ones who were next to them, which never were colonized. And as we see decolonialization, we see that these other peoples who are not descendant from this are rejecting it entirely and going back to their old ways. And when that happens, things don't turn out so well for the people who are descendant from those mother civilizations, the European descendant groups. And for me, I'd like to argue tonight that these civilizations should still exist, adapting in many ways maybe, but there's something worth preserving there. I'm expecting Destiny tonight to, get into all sorts of little, maybe little nitpicking details about how is Mexican music different from American music, like he did before. Maybe quiz me on musical terms, like partials and blues scales or something like that. I think that's all completely beside the point. And, maybe I couldn't tell you with the correct terminology the difference between Mexican music and American music, but I can tell you that if you play them both in front of me, I can tell you the difference. And that's what you see today is, a lot of these things like culture, which are very difficult to articulate and describe, they are they are visible upon plain view when you go to different places, how these people are different. So, I'd like to get into that a little bit tonight, and I'd like to talk about the future of where this nation is headed, where all of Europe is headed, the future of a white minority in the United States, while we have these two separate groups of peoples that, one descendant from ancient Rome and Greece, and largely categorized by Christendom throughout history, and the people who are not, who see them as invaders, as oppressors, as colonizers, as slave owners, as people who did the Holocaust. I see all this as a major problem, and I think there's going to be all sorts of cultural and social conflict that we're headed towards that won't be so good for those people.
Yeah, that's me. I'm sorry. What the fuck is this debate over again? I just can I get a quick refresher on that?
Immigration, and little Timmy.
Okay. Jesus. So I think that today, I think that the internet, especially, and all the technology around us has kind of led us to be more isolated than I think we have at any other point in human history. Technology was supposed to be the thing that kind of like bridged our worlds together, give us an ability to communicate with each other, and allow this kind of like inflow and outflow of culture and friendship and relationship and communication and all this stuff to happen. And in some ways it has, but I think in other ways it's left people feeling more disconnected or isolated than they have in the past. I think that these feelings of disconnection and isolation are weighing on people, and I think it leads them to try to find these little niche groups where it feels like they have something that they can identify with, because it is no longer with your local communities, or it seems like it's no longer with the local church. So some people, become rabid socialists or communists, and they try to pretend they're Marxists or whatever, even though they've never read a word of Marx. And other people, unfortunately, look at their skin color, they find white identitarian groups and like, oh, well, we're white, like that can be our thing. I don't want to go back to shitting in the streets. I like playing video games on my computer, and I like all of the modern accessories and luxuries that exist in our current day life. I don't see the need to get rid of any of that. I don't see an advantage of going back to, usually people say go back to the 1950s, but I guess now we're talking all the way back to the 400s, if we're going back to Rome. So yeah, I think that the idea that you can freeze culture in any type of glass and have this unchanging, unmoving culture is really silly. I guess through the course of this debate, the thing that I'll seek to establish is that one, you don't really have a good way of identifying what any of your problems are. Instead, it's all kind of just these vague notions of like, well, what about this, if that, or giving some incorrect diagnosis for why Rome fell. Spoiler alert, it wasn't because of uncontrolled immigration. And then I'll more importantly point out that even though you can't identify the problem, or especially because you can't identify the problem, you also have no real prescription. And I think that's kind of one of the saddest things for a lot of these more radical groups is you get a lot of these people that get kind of funneled into these groups where they're like, okay, well, we're white, we got to protect our culture, what do we do? And you don't really have any answers for that. You're not winning legislatively anywhere. You don't have your own country anywhere. You don't have any representation anywhere. And you really don't have any plans forward for like, well, how do we make these groups? Instead of encouraging people to live healthier lives, to make friends, to go out and socialize, it's more just like getting more and more in the weeds of these insane online whatever groups where you continue to like exhibit the most unhealthy behavior possible. So yeah, I guess that's what we'll talk about in this conversation.
All right, we can open up the floor now.
Sure. Well, the first thing I'd like to say is I'm glad that you openly admit that white people who seek to preserve and sustain any form of their culture and any part of it, they have no representation today. They are largely outnumbered by people who are against that. They don't have any political power, and there's basically no one sticking up for them. And I think that's a big part of the problem I'd like to get into tonight.
Sure. Can you tell me what aspects of white culture do you think need to be represented politically that are not currently represented politically?
Well, it's a good question. What I'd say is that America right now is a lost nation in some ways when it comes to culture, and it has been for quite some time. As you correctly pointed out before, America has been a mixing of different ethnic groups for a very long time now. And even while it was still just the European descendant groups that are all mixing together, even though they had more in common than people from Africa or China or India, or South America, there's still a mixture which is causing
we're kind of
lack of a cohesive culture.
Yeah, so
we're
trailing off
these communities in order to dissolve, like you said, where people are not able to just go out and in the public square or have I don't know, but like public dances, things like that.
You can go on the public center of public dances.
They get to know each other, right?
You can do that all right now. You can do all of this right now. So I'm going to go back and ask the question again.
But people are not for some reason, and that's the question, right?
Yeah, but this is the whole. Yeah, so this is the whole point. So I think there's a lot of interesting conversation that we can have about why people aren't going out publicly anymore. I think there's an interesting conversation to be had about the loss of churches as the kind of centerfold for communities. I think the loss of union culture probably plays into that quite a bit. I think that the hyperfixation on moving to the coast into these like more concentrated cities for jobs, the economic opportunities is probably a reason. I think think that technology leads us to be more and more culturally isolated from each other because we connect via the internet now instead of via face-to-face. I think that there are plenty of interesting kind of questions to ask to figure out why we're kind of like more isolated. I don't think the answer is because there aren't enough white people or we're losing our white culture. So I'm going to bring us back one more time, and we'll see how long you talk without actually answering this question again. What are some aspects of American culture that you believe aren't adequately represented in Congress? Like, what are some aspects of white American culture that you'd want to see represented in Congress, and where should they be represented?
Well, it's funny that you would phrase the question that way, because it's there's an obvious push in all of not just the media but in government against what people in critical race theory would call white culture, and they seem very good at describing the differences between white culture and African American culture or Latin culture, and they seem even more interested in making the culture in America like those other ones than what you call white culture.
So can you tell me, what do people in critical race theory define white culture as then, if they've defined it? So you can't give me your definition, so how do they define it since you're citing them now?
Yeah, sure. Things like the Protestant work ethic, things like the focus on
so America is already one of the most overworked
time
nations.
Orientations are, there's an emphasis on the scientific method.
So America,
individualism. There's the holidays, there's the traditions, it's the heroes, it's the shared story of a people that goes back for thousands of years. And that's the difference, is that these people, they see themselves as descended from these civilizations. That's the story that a lot of Americans grew up being told, is, look, here is the long course of history of your civilization, of your people, and you have you're born into this. Whereas other people from other groups, they don't see it the same way. They have a different shared story, and these shared stories are one of the most important parts of culture next to language, which is they see it as these people did all of this and then colonized and oppressed your people. And they see it as a bad thing rather than a good thing. And so I think a big part of it is just simply embracing the traditions, embracing the historical Western European identity. And the people who are not from that are not going to buy into that. Whereas the people who are, I think that we could live a much better future if they did that.
So two big parts. So number one, this is kind of pointless, but I'll just bring attention to this. Every time I ask you a question, all you do is you start reading me another script or another monologue, like you're giving a speech. I'm trying to engage you in a one-on-one conversation, but it seems like every single time I ask you a question, you have to kind of like dive off into some other. I don't know if you have these written down.
I don't think that happened at all. I think I gave you 4 or 5 different answers of just small examples of white culture. Yeah, and largely what I'm describing more, I see that you're trying to drag the conversation down into the weeds on like specific parameters or facets of culture. That's like, what's this one thing you want? And we can talk about that all night. But there's something larger than that happening here.
So if you want to do turnabout as fair play, if you want, you can ask me about some more complicated topic that I enjoy, that has many facets to it. I will be able to defend to you every single one of those facets about that particular thing that I enjoy. I'm sorry, but I wholesale reject this idea that me asking you about any of these 4 or 5 things that you say are the most important qualifiers of your culture as getting lost in the weeds. With all due respect, these are the weeds that you're running us into, and you're the one that has the inability to defend them. I noticed that you opened the speech up being upset about our last musical conversation. I will remind you once more, the only reason we had that conversation is because you're the one that said that you had the background in music and you were a professional musician and you were the one that wanted to get in that conversation. And we don't have to have that conversation, but if you're going to bring up a topic, I am going to ask you questions. Okay, hold on. If you want to go line by line, we can do this, but when you ramble on a monologue, I'm going to respond to every single thing you said. So I'm going to do that. This is why this conversation is already kind of like getting off track,
sure,
right?
Of course.
If you're going to bring up 4 or 5 things that are all part,
for the trees,
I haven't. No, I'm not losing anything, right? Forests don't exist unless trees are in them. Okay, we're trying to figure out if you have any trees at all. That's the problem right now, right? So when you start to say things,
you're denying that there is any facet that exists to white identity at all, or European descendant groups in any manner. Is that what you're saying? There's no trees in this forest whatsoever.
I think that in the United States of America,
in
the United States of America. Wait, are you trying to talk, Brittany?
No, go ahead. I was gonna.
Okay. In the United States of America, if people were to start asking me where your big cultural divides are, I think that the number one, easily, would be urban versus rural. That would be my huge cultural divide. And then we could start going down other lines, but in terms of falling down ethnic lines, I mean, firstly, like how you would even begin to define white gets hairy, right? What are we talking about for like mixed race relationships? What about for like a lot of Hispanic people? So like my mom is Cuban, but none of us are really dark. A lot of people that come from Cuba aren't. You know, you've got the whole mestizo versus castizo thing. Like you've got children of like relatively Hispanic looking people that look pretty white. Like this whole idea that you're trying to separate things out as like, these people have this culture and these people have this culture, when it's probably way more regional, and people can tell that. Like this is another thing too, like people can tell just by the jokes you say or the way you sound, you know, like, are you from the East Coast? Are you from the West Coast? Are you from California? Are you from Northern Florida? These like racial lines that you're so obsessed with drawing, I don't think most people even identify across these culturally.
Yeah, I didn't put it that way at all. In fact, I'm not talking about skin color in any way. That's something you brought up.
To be clear, you said mixing a lot of different ethnic groups. You used that word multiple times. I've written it down on a notepad in front of me. I'm writing that down. So if you're telling me this has...
that ethnicity and race are the same thing?
Can you tell me the difference between the two?
Yeah, sure. Race is, well, let's go with, for the sake of discussion, the critical race theory definition.
No, let's go with your definition. You're the one using the word, so you tell me how you're using it. If you want to draw a distinction between race and ethnicity, that's fine. Tell me how you just...
I'm not the one who brought up race. See, I brought up ethnicity, and ethnicity I can go into. That's different. Ethnicity is a group of people who have a shared history. They have a shared culture. They have generally shared religion, language, you know, music, art, all of these things, architecture. It all ties in together because it's a group of people who are distinct from other ethnic groups.
So can you give me an example of
racial,
like, can you give me an example of an ethnic
group? There are
group?
people who are largely the same race who have gone into separate ethnic groups with distinct identities, right?
Yeah.
So absolutely, this idea that it's racial is you know, I haven't said anything like that at all. Now,
well, so if you have like
you're asking about culture, and I've told you already, the most important part of one of the most important parts of culture to me is the shared story, shared history of a people, because a lot of things are downstream from that. The traditions, which, like, what do they represent? Something in that story. The holidays would represent something in that story. The heroes, the legends, the archetypes of what it means.
We're on the monologue
to be
again.
A man
This is the
things
memorized
like
speech again. Yeah.
Well, you just asked me to get real specific about one of the aspects.
I didn't.
Of
all
culture,
I asked you was all I asked you was the difference between race and ethnicity. I didn't ask you anything about culture. But every time you answer a question, you've got to dive into your prepared speech again.
I didn't answer any questions at all whatsoever. Now, I described the difference between race and ethnicity right there.
Yeah, so now I'm trying to ask you a question to figure out if you really believe this. So would you say that a black person and a white person that grew up in the same ghetto and came out of it with all the same values and gangster rap and whatever you want to ascribe to them, right? You'd say, oh, that white guy and that black guy, those guys are both ethnically the same. You would say that?
Yeah, I don't think there's actually a good example of that takes place by virtue of the fact alone that these people have different shared stories. The white guy and the black guy, maybe if you look at just their lives or like what they ate that week or you know, what they've done in the past, you know, 10 years, maybe you could say it like that. Like, these people have a lot of things in common. They can talk on the same level. They know what they're talking about, things like that. But when it comes to the larger arc of history, these people have completely different stories, and their people groups have completely different stories. And I think that a part of what I'm here to
doing the memorized
describe
speech again.
The issue of mashing all of these people together, it denies both of those people in that scenario their historic people's identity, which is important.
Yep. Okay. Good speech. So I'm going to ask you the question again, since you seem to be unable to answer it. So if you have a black guy and a white guy, they grow up in the same neighborhood, go to the same schools, listen to the same music and all that shit, would you say that that black person and that white person are ethnically the same thing?
I think I just answered that, like, exactly. Do you want me to just repeat myself?
I'd like you to answer that question without giving me a speech about, like, well, I would say they're culturally similar. I'm asking you because I asked you for a definition of ethnicity, and you gave me a definition I've never heard before. Now, maybe some people use this definition. I'm just curious if you really believe it.
So you said
ethnicity.
You're more than likely to look up the definition of ethnicity. It doesn't surprise me that you don't know it, given that you're totally okay with wiping them out all across the planet.
I've never said anything about wiping anything out. I'm just
curious. You're talking about mashing all sorts of people from different historically ethnic groups together, making them both grow up in the exact same way in everything, in some postmodern worldview, some constructivist idea that we're going to just make everybody all come together in this.
Is every single person that went to your high school the exact same ethnicity? Do they become that by going to the same
No,
school?
not at
Is
all.
every single person in a workplace the exact same ethnicity?
Ethnic groups in my high school all identified with each other. Actually, it's like all the black kids hung out in the same spot all together every single day. They were even there during classes. I'm not sure how it worked.
Cool.
But
so
they hold themselves distinct. It's not something I've done. This is something people all across the world, all across the planet do. Okay,
I understand. We're going into another memorized speech.
Sure,
I understand.
go for it.
Okay,
There's
so
no memorized
it is
speech,
another
man.
memorized
This
speech.
is
Yeah. So
all
I've asked two
fly.
questions. I haven't gotten an answer on either. So we're right after bad start. I'll try to do this ethnicity one more time. It should be a simple yes from you if you truly believe the answer you're giving me. So if you have a black guy and a white guy, grew up in the same neighborhood, same shared experiences, same music, same movies, and everything, would you say that these two people are ethnically identical? This black person and this white person are of the same ethnicity. Would you say that?
Yeah, not at all. And the reason for that is what I've been saying all along this whole time is it's a group of people with a shared history. That's one of the most important parts of culture, and I've described it a lot. I mean, you can call it a monologue all you want, but it's very important because a lot of aspects of culture all come downstream from that. The holidays, the heroes, the traditions.
So we're doing the memorized speech
language,
again. We're doing the memorized speech again. We're doing the memorized speech again.
No, these are all just ideas off the top of my head. I'm not like
I can tell they're coming off the top of your head because you didn't prepare for this. I don't know why you would think that if I talk about this type of shit all day, I don't know why you think you can do this conversation on the fly with me. That's kind of surprising. Or you just like think I'm an idiot, I guess.
Yeah, well, then it's interesting that you say that, but yeah, when I give you like exactly the answers to your questions, you're completely dumbfounded as to like how you can possibly respond to that. Because I understand you want the answer. You want the answer to be like, yeah, oh no, it's all about just white people and it's all about race and we should ship everybody else off or something like that. I get that that's the answer you're looking for. That's just not the answer that I have for you. So instead of just keeping on trying to keep this conversation down on this one point on, well, you didn't give me the answer I wanted for ethnicity. You gave me the international relations definition of it.
So
Instead
if you're
of
telling
that,
me,
maybe you can try and move this conversation
I'm trying to move
forward.
along. So if you're telling me that a black,
we have important things to
I understand.
discuss.
So if you're telling me that a black person and a white person can never have the same ethnicity, then it seems like there's some aspect of skin color that's important there, or some genetic aspect that's important there. Can you at least admit that? Or
Well, it's funny that you categorize it according to racial lines, according to skin color especially, because
to be clear, you're the one that's done that because you repeatedly tell me that you would never call a white and a black person the same ethnicity. You've done that.
Yeah,
I'm just trying to figure out what you mean.
And it has nothing to do with whether they're black or white. That's the thing.
Then why is a black person and a white person can't be? Why can't they be the same ethnicity?
Historical ethnic groups who have different stories. The black guy, his story is of his people, not just the story of his life. The story of his people is never going to be that he's the descendant from these colonizers. He's a descendant from a part of Rome. He's a descendant from one of these Roman dependent or descended civilizations.
How do you know
that? So that's never going to be his story.
But you don't know. You don't know all of these people.
It's going to be that these people oppressed his people. These people.
So we're back on the memorized talking points again.
They took people onto the slave ships. They put these people in chains. They they did slavery.
Still back on the memorized talking points.
There's nothing memorized about it, man. It's you can cope all you want saying I memorized something for this. Like you're not that important.
Yeah, so usually when I'm having a conversation with somebody, the way that I can usually tell that they're nervous is it's kind of like when you're doing an essay in high school and you don't know the answer to the question, so you just start writing down every single thing you know on the topic, and you hope that you put enough that the teacher marks you up for
that's a cute way to categorize it.
Well,
man,
I mean that's essentially what you're doing.
Deep questions about culture, about history, about ethnicity, and these are not just simple things. If you want to go with, well, culture is just whether you're white or black. To me, that's completely
I'm not the one that said whether culture was just white or black. You're the one that said. You're the one that told me that a white and a black person can never be the same ethnicity, and then in the same breath told me it has nothing to do with skin color. When I told you the only difference between these two people is the fact that they're white and black. Maybe they were both descended a long time ago from Romans. You don't know that. Not every black person in the United States.
Skin color all you like.
You're the one doing that. To be clear.
Test, and it's going to say what ethnicity are you from? What's your ancestors? And it's going to be what for the black guy. It's going to be Bantu or
Wait, why would you bring up why would you bring up 23
it's
and
going
me?
to be Spanish, Portuguese, Anglo, something like that.
So why would you bring up 23 and me for ethnicity when you told me ethnicity was shared culture, religion, language, and art? What does 23 and me have to do with that?
And again, well, you're missing out again on the most important part. I don't know if this is like you're just unable to hear this part, but the shared history, the shared story of a people, and the people from the Congo or from Nigeria or from Ethiopia, they all have a different story going back 1,000 years than European descendant peoples, and they always will, no matter what. It doesn't matter if you mash them all together. It doesn't matter if you tell them, okay, we're all going to eat apple pie and whistle Dixie together. It doesn't matter, because they have maybe in their lives, if you are only working with people who can't think in terms beyond their lives, they can't think about history before they were born, that would be something that would work.
So
but that's
again,
not how
to be clear, like,
that's not how the world works.
I just think it's really funny. It's not funny, actually. It's really frustrating, because I know that you're not giving what you actually believe. Maybe because we're on a public platform, this is why you hide your face too. When you're talking about like ethnicity, and then you tell me very specifically it has nothing to do with like skin color or genes, and then you're appealing to a 23andMe test. We all know what 23andMe is. So it feels like you're just trying to dodge the question. But we'll move past that, and I'll try to engage, I guess, with whatever I can like dig out of like this shithole you've dug yourself into. So you're talking about like this idea of like shared culture, shared religion, shared language. So let's say that you have like a person from some culture that their like grandparents immigrated to another culture. So now they've had parents that were born in that country, and now they've been born in that country. Like, what culture or ethnicity, we should say, I guess, are they more likely to identify with? The country where they've now existed for 2 generations, or whatever history was in the country they came from?
Yeah, I can answer that question, actually, I think pretty well with an anecdote, if you'll grant me that. So I've had a couple friends over the course of my life that I used to, argue about it, international relations stuff with about all the time. I argued immigration. Back in my cringe Ben Shapiro days, I argued immigration with a Hispanic friend of mine, a couple of them actually. And it's funny, at one point I got them, really cornered, and they had nothing else to say, and they knew that I had them. And what they told me, I'll never forget, one of my friends looked me in the eye, and he said, well, really, I just don't want to keep them from coming in here because they're my people. Those are my people that are coming across the border. And that really struck me at the time. It was, maybe one of my first red pills on this, because I asked him, I'm like, what do you mean? Aren't Americans your people? You're a citizen here. You were born and raised here. You're a second generation immigrant. You know the story of how your parents got here, how grateful they were for the opportunities and everything. And yet he still says, yeah, but Americans aren't like my people. That's just like my nationality. That's what I have legal documents for. And the reason is, as I've been saying before, his history is different from ours. Whether you take him in and you say, okay, you raise him to like I said, to love apple pie and baseball, whistling Dixie, okay?
We're back in the prepared speech, by the way. Go ahead.
He will always, no, not at all. I'm telling a story.
The apple
he
pie,
will
the whistling
always
Dixie.
see himself as his story is that his people, he came from a previously colonized country, okay? And then he came to America, and his people are still back there. That's the way he sees it, no matter what. Now, unless you want to erase all of the history books and tell all of these people, none of that happened, and then raise them all in the same cultural conditions, all in the same way, and say, we were all just born just now, and there were no differences between the people historically. That's fine. Maybe you could make something like that happen inside of a lab or something like that. But the fact is that no matter what this guy, how he's raised, what his culture is being raised in America, he will always identify with the people from his historical ethnic group. That's why I brought up the 23andMe thing. It shows that these people are from distinct ethnic groups historically. They have different stories.
For every one anecdote you can provide, I can give you like a million anecdotes in the opposite direction. So I mean, like, if you're gonna tell me like things that your friend said, I don't really know how I can ever argue with that. I'll give a really common Asian American experience that one of the most cringe things that Asian people deal with, especially Asian women, is when white guys go up to them and they're like, where are you from? Where are you really from? And they're like, bro, I'm American. I don't speak fucking Korean or Japanese or Chinese or whatever, right? Like, they're Americans because they were born here. They speak the language. If you heard them on a microphone or a headphone, you wouldn't know that they were from any other fucking part of the world besides probably the West Coast, like San Francisco or LA. I have never in my life, and I'm willing to bet that I probably have more friends that are non-white than you, I have never in my life heard a non-white person that is the children of people that were in the United States say, those aren't my people. Now, you hang out in very far white, well, white and right circles, so it might be the case that you are like talking to a lot of like literal ethnic identitarians, but whatever you are describing is so fucking far off the norm, I can't hardly even engage with that hypothetical. As somebody that's dated Hispanic, as somebody whose family is... Hold on, you gave your whole pretty speech about apple pies, okay?
Go for it.
So as somebody that has dated Hispanic people and Asian people, as somebody that has a half Cuban family on my mom's side, I have interacted with I have never in my life heard somebody say those aren't my people. That is just... So I'm gonna circle back. Yeah. So I'm gonna circle back. So, do you remember the question that I asked you even before you just rattled off that anecdote that you had ready for this?
You've been asking a lot of good questions tonight, man.
Yeah, and I can't get an answer on any of them. So my question is that if you had somebody over here in the United States in general, and their like grandparents and parents lived here, and then they were born here, and they like know the language, they know the culture, so that means they listen to the music, the TV shows, they know our religions, our schools, and all of that. Do you think they're more likely to identify with this American culture or with wherever their grandparents came from?
I think that for people like that have been taken out of their own historical culture and raised up into this new one, it can be confusing. You see people choosing, between two identities a lot, and that's, that might not be good for children, by the way. But yeah,
when you say raised in new culture, it's the culture you're in.
I know that there are some people who identify as American. They love the American dream and they love this country. We could pull up videos of people talking about that, and I understand that, but the problem is that that's not largely what's happening anymore. Now and I think it has something to do with the change in the demographics of where immigration is coming from.
Yep.
And now
we're back into another memorized talking point about
places.
Where people are immigrating from has nothing to do with the question at all.
Yeah, it does actually, because it's about these people are coming from previously colonized places, and they have a different story, man. It's I don't know what to tell you. Their historical ethnic stories.
I don't understand when you keep saying story. What story do you think you have?
Well, my story is that my ancestors arrived in America before the Mayflower did. Okay, before the Pilgrims. They were driven out by of Europe. Well, not driven out. My ancestor's brother-in-law accused his wife of being a witch. Okay, and she wasn't a witch. She drowned, but he left for America, and he made it to Jamestown before the Pilgrims.
Yeah, so can you tell me?
My people have been here ever since. On the other side, my ancestors are descended from the Pilgrims themselves. Okay. They've been here since the foundation of this country, and before that, they were in England for thousands of years. That's the story of my people, of my ancestors, and I don't share that in common with my Hispanic friend, and I never will.
Can you tell me what aspects of their culture you live out today that are unique or independent from other white people that might not have the same shared... So I'm half Cuban, and I think my ancestors more recently came from like either France or Italy. So can you tell me some aspects of your culture that are independent from mine as two white people, just because you have those particular ancestors?
Well, it's funny. First of all, I just want to say it's funny that now we're just two white people, when it seems like every time I talk to this guy, he brings up that he's like Hispanic or whatever. But
I said I'm half descended from Cubans. I don't know if you consider Hispanic or not. I consider myself white.
Okay, so
unless I'm applying for student aid.
Cuban immigrant. But
so what aspects of your ancestors' culture do you inherit today? You still live out today that are unique from normal American culture?
Yeah, I think that's a good question, and really it speaks to the fact that, as I said before, our culture in America is currently in a sort of a funk. We're in a lost place where we have many different cultures.
Gotcha. So you don't have an answer for that. So let's go all the way back then to the very first question.
I don't have an answer.
You don't have the answer to that. Yeah.
You're asking about a specific Anglo culture descendant thing, which is like a lot of the European cultures, they had many things in common, and they might have slightly different traditions, cultures, holidays, different heroes from their places, things like that.
Yeah.
But yeah, I don't identify as Anglo, right? I don't identify as someone from England.
True.
I have no nationalistic, patriotic duty to England itself. Yep.
So the correct answer is, so we don't identify with cultures of the past. There might be some traditions that we inherit, but largely our like current culture is generally shaped by the culture that we're grown into. So a third generation immigrant born in the United States is not going to
the culture from the past. I wouldn't say that even a little bit.
Sure. So
because
I understand.
Obviously descended from Rome,
Okay.
and again, it's
descended from Rome. Yeah.
we may have. You could say, okay, what aspects of Anglo culture are you living out in your daily life? But we have all of these traditions, man. Like Thanksgiving, there's something that the Anglos did, right? But all Americans are now taking part in this. We have many such cases of these types of things where these cultures are mixing together.
Wait. Thanksgiving, did that come from Rome? Is that what you're saying?
Not at all. What I've said is that these cultures have developed as descendants from Rome and Greece, and they've taken on their own holidays, their own heroes, a different story.
Okay, now we're back into the memorized speech. Go ahead.
Yeah, well,
the heroes,
so
the apple pie, the shared history.
Here's what I'm getting at. Yeah. What I'm getting at is that America is lost in a way in terms of culture right now, and I think that we need to forge a new culture that's based on good principles and values, just as the Romans did. There wasn't a culture before them that they returned to, and somebody might have said, like, well, what specific things, what's a precise thing about music that you want in order to.
I haven't pushed you on to super ultra precise anything. I'm just you literally all of this stuff.
You were quizzing me on music notes and blues scales.
So the reason I asked you that prior, I asked you that prior because you told me you were a professional musician. I didn't know that you would have the audacity to completely and totally fabricate your history in front of somebody that's actually been a spoken
Now, first of all, the definition of professional means you got paid to do it, which I did. Okay, so I was a professional.
That's great that your mom paid you and your friends to play for like her fucking friends at like a wedding once. Okay,
I was at like public venues and stuff like that. I played jazz. I played the violin.
Okay. We don't want to do this. Listen, you've already taken the biggest L a man can ever take on this topic. We don't need to revisit it, okay?
Yeah, we don't need to rehash the music thing, but I'll just tell you, man.
The problem I'm running into is that, like, you seem, and I guess this is, at the end of the day, this is kind of my problem, is that, like, you have all these strong feelings about stuff that is just so amorphous and intangential. Like, you don't know what your old culture was. You don't know what your current culture. Okay, hold on. You're rambling. You've done your prepared speech like 15 times, Rubio. Okay, slow down. All right. So you have like you've got like all of these kind of ideas, but you can't like quantify or qualify like a single thing you said. And I'm not asking you to like give me the exact definition of blah 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 blah. I'm just asking for like
in many ways. I'm just not giving you the answer that you're looking for. We obviously have traditions, holidays, heroes, legends, all that are descended from the civilizations that we came from. And so when you say that obviously we don't inherit culture from the past, it's absurd on its face. It's ridiculous. You can't tell anyone from any other culture that at all. In America, we are.
The problem is that, like, I'm just trying to ask you.
Cultures put together, and I think that we should take the best values that we can and forge a new culture that's based on.
We're back in the memorized speech.
Becoming great and excellence. Things like that.
Yeah.
We should be embracing this stuff.
Okay, so just one more time. I'm sorry if this is really offensive. Can you give me like one example of like a ritual or a tradition or something that you mean when you talk about like your family's like past or something like?
My family specifically, no, but from American history, obviously.
No, you didn't say you had American history. You talked about your family specifically fucking coming from Rome and living in England for thousands of years, so I want to know.
Yeah, and what do you think happened after that, man? My ancestors participated in every single major American event all throughout our history. My dad still has a cavalry saber from the Confederate side in the Civil War, all right? So I do have a lot of story with America here. It's not just Rome and England, okay? And a lot of these people, there are people whose ancestors didn't fight in the Civil War, who just arrived here, who don't respect the ancient civilizations that we derived from, much less the one which they've come into here. And they disrespect it so much that they say that they want to tear down the institution.
Back to the memorized speech, tear down the statues,
that's
back
what's
to the memorized
man.
talking points. Yeah, okay. I just think it's very funny that it's very rare that I can like demonstrate an argument in real time. So because you are a whatever generation immigrant, you have no idea where you came from. I could show you a 23andMe that actually is completely contrary to your entire history, and you would actually have no idea because it sounds to me like you haven't inherited anything. So when I talk about like a cultural tradition, right? So half of my family is Cuban. So my sister had a quinceañera, okay? This is like a Spanish celebration when a girl turns 15 years old. Or something that I went through religiously was my 7, not 7. There are like 4 or 5 holy sacraments in the Catholic Church. So things like your first communion, or things like your confirmation, or things, you know, your early baptism. So these are examples of traditions that I was looking for, and I don't even like this shit, and I can give you a few of my own, but it sounds like you have nothing. So we're gonna move way past this, and then I'm gonna go all the way back to one of the first questions I asked you. I don't know how you can possibly answer this question though. What type of quote unquote white culture do you feel like is lacking in representation when it comes to like the legislature? So in Congress, like what are some aspects of white culture where you're like, fuck, we don't have this represented? Because all the other stuff you named before, like the scientific method, I think all of our academic institutions work off of that. You mentioned like work ethic. I'm pretty sure Americans are the most overworked people in the world. I'm just trying to figure out like what aspects of American culture aren't represented like in your eyes in the forefront of like American politics or culture.
Yeah, well, so it's you know, it's funny that you say that, like that's something I said, when it's something that you said. Actually, you're the one who said that white people have no representation in government for people who want to preserve their culture. White people have no representation in the media or in widespread popular belief. They have no representation for their historical cultures on social media, anything like that. That was the point that you brought up, and so it's I just agreed with you there. Okay, and what I'm saying is that these, not just the culture, the institutions, the civilization, its history, they're all under attack, and they're under a cultural attack from people who think it's all bad, and they think it's all wrong. It was wrong from its inception, and it's evil still today, and it all needs to be torn down along with the people who built it. And that's what I hear, what I have such a problem with, and that's why I keep going off like this.
Yep.
You know,
so for the 5th time, I'm going to ask that question again. I don't know why you keep trying to like reverse Uno this on me. So I wrote this down because you ramble a lot. Although at this point you've repeated yourself 5 or 6 times, so I remember a lot of it. So you said,
oh, right,
America is a lost nation when it comes to culture. Question. Right? So you said America's a lost nation when it comes to culture. Now, I inferred from that, and I could be wrong, correct me wrong, I inferred from that you feel like there's some important aspect of our culture that is either gone or in the process of being removed. So I asked you, what is some aspect of white American culture that you feel like doesn't have good representation anymore? You feel really strongly about this, so I'm just curious,
Yeah, so, well, that was a good memorized statement, but you know, let's go with the family structure. The nuclear family is currently under attack at all sorts of levels. It's you know, you see another media article about it every single day. We don't see government programs that are trying to benefit people who want to start families. In fact, we see the opposite, and largely from especially the calls of people on your side are trying to say things like the nuclear family is bad. I saw an article the other day, I think it was the New York Times, that said Corona is destroying the nuclear family, and maybe that's a good thing. Okay, we see the LGBT crowd who are railing against the nuclear family and its history, and they're saying that that's all bad, it's all oppression, it's patriarchal, you know, things like that. And so that's a great example of one that I would say is it's better for the people, it's better for the children, better for the man and wife, and it's better for the civilization at large as each individual you know, chooses this.
So when you say that like the nuclear family is under attack, so I'm just going by stuff that I see. So right now, if you get married in the United States, you're incentivized through tax structures to have like a wife or husband because of the married filing jointly status. And you also get paid a decent amount of money right now via the both the earned income tax credit and the child tax credit for like having a child. Like, in what ways do you feel like we are actively discouraging people from like having like 2 parents in the house today, or like in what ways is that happening?
Yeah, well, I'd say a big part of the nuclear family structure was that a man would provide for the family and the mom would raise the children, whereas we see now the state and all of the media and everybody on your side pushing for that to be abolished, that to be dissolved, and not, unattainable for men and women in the new vision of this idea where the state takes care of your kids. It raises them in daycares and schools and teaches them the state propaganda, you know, whatever their version of history and current events is at the time.
So I don't know of any, like, there might be state-ran daycares. I've never heard of that. There are state schools. It's probably good that we send our kids to schools.
Yeah, no, what I'm talking about is that the state is at the very least not combating this push against the nuclear family in ways that it obviously could. You know, you could have more like incentives to have children. You could discouraging women from being in the workforce, propaganda
Yeah, so
about
let's-
women staying home with their children and how that's a good thing rather than a bad thing. Most women are raised in the world today, and a lot of this does take place in schools, which is teachers paid by the government. Maybe the president isn't ordering it, but this is happening in these places. Women are raised to believe that being a mom is like demeaning. It's like you're not a successful, independent career woman or something like that, and it's demeaning motherhood, and it's making it lose its value to women in their eyes, and they see themselves as unsuccessful if they were to settle for that rather than a career and travel.
So do you think that women should be discouraged from going to college?
Discouraged? I don't know if I would go that far, but I think that would bring about a better result in terms of the nuclear family.
Sure, so let me ask again in a different way, without you trying to, because you're weaseling a lot. Okay, so do you think it would be better for society if women were discouraged from going to college?
Better for society in some ways, definitely.
Why do you keep why do you keep weaseling? I'm just asking you like a clear question.
What do you mean weaseling?
Well, when you say in some ways, so in what ways would it be better and what ways would it be worse?
Every single point.
So talk me through the positives and negatives, and then at the end of it. No, we're not getting into the weeds. I get so upset. Why do you keep saying we're getting in the weeds anytime I ask you to defend a single point? If you want to just ramble off your prepared speeches, you can do that. You can do that when I'm not here, or you can go do that on your own stream or your own YouTube channel. Don't get upset.
Don't get I talked about the nuclear family.
Now we're going
you asked
the
about
prepared
the
speech.
You asked about
the prepared speech.
And, it's the state. A prepared speech about what you talked about. Everything's a prepared speech tonight.
It's a prepared speech because you're running around the question because you're uncomfortable answering. I feel like I can play both sides of this argument better than you can. That's where we're at right now. Okay, that's how far behind you are in this conversation. So I'm just asking you.
I think that speaks to a misunderstanding of what I'm saying, man. Because I've talked about the nuclear family. I've talked about state incentives in order to make that more desirable at the very least. I've talked about how the government is the one running these schools. They could be incentivizing or making teachers talk about the virtues of motherhood and talk about ways in which people can still build a nuclear family.
Okay, so we're talking around a bunch of random shit. So my question was, do you think holistically, now if you want, you can talk about the pros and cons. I just want an answer at the end. Do you think holistically it would be better if we discouraged women from going to college?
Well, given the state of the universities today, I'd say so. Just by virtue of the one statistic alone, that 90% of divorces involving college-educated women are initiated by the woman. Okay, that's like 20 or 30% higher than when they don't go through these universities. And I'm not sure why that is exactly, but it's that's why. It's like maybe that's not the best way to combat that, but it would combat it in some ways. It would benefit the nuclear family.
Yep. Okay, cool. I got you. I'm glad. Okay, yeah, we got this. Okay, so
you can ask me these gotcha questions all night about like you hate women or something like that.
They're not.
But I want to get to the heart of the issue.
Okay. Here, can I wait? Hold on. I'm not trying to ask you gotcha questions. Can I tell you how you should have answered this question, and then maybe you can do better on these debates in the future if we ever talk again. Okay. So the answer that you should have given, it's okay. That's fine. Okay. I've debated enough of your type to know how you should answer this if you were educated on the topic. Okay. So the answer should be yes. We probably should discourage women from going to college because when women enter college, a lot of bad things happen to the historically understood dichotomy of man versus woman. Men are now competing against women for earning wages, which they shouldn't be because it's an attack on their masculinity and it's an attack on the family structure, and it discourages women from starting families until far later in their life to where they might be completely discouraged from doing so, and it upsets the natural balance of the household where a man should be in charge of being the alpha, the breadwinner, the decision maker, and the woman the caretaker or somebody that ought to be watching the children and taking care of the household. That was the correct answer that you were supposed to give.
Seems like you really understand the issues, man. But the fact is, I said more than half of those things.
No, you haven't.
I said more than half of those things.
You're like,
I said almost definitely yes, first of all. And I brought up how bad it is.
You didn't say almost definitely yes. You said it depends. There's pros and cons and blah blah blah. Yeah.
I've talked about how bad it is for in many ways, and so it's like. Yeah, I've talked about the divorce rates. I talked about a lot of reasons. Just because I didn't give the exact reasons that you wanted, I think that they're largely tangential and they're all connected.
Yeah. Okay. So now that I've given you the argument for this. So now we move on to the second aspect of this, and this is what I said initially, is that even if you are able to identify some sort of claim, now I ask you, what are you going to do about it? In what world can you exist in where women have had the ability to go to college and work jobs, and now you're going to take that from them? Can you walk me through what type of policy proposal or something that you would start doing that would get women out of college?
Yeah, no, I'm not advocating for any specific policy right now at all. I think that if people were made aware of the way that things are, in contrast to the way that things used to be when civilization was thriving rather than decaying, I think people would try and act differently, and that would play out in all sorts of different ways throughout society. I
Okay,
think that
so
we could